Everybody, and welcome to this month's Audio Production Town Hall. We're glad that you could join us. Each month you'll find us here talking about all kinds of different topics related to audio production. From making records to sound for film and to sound for games and all that and beyond. We hope that you plan to join us regularly, and we'll be here every month. And if you should miss a session, you'll be able to find the archives and the recording, the same link that you found to get here right now. So today we're going to talk about the best way to capture a drum kit with the limited resources that you got with your launch box. So we'll continue this in another session where we're going to do more microphones. So today we're going to start with a very basic setup. So everything that you received with your launch box, we're going to try to use it and keep adding on to it. So the only thing we added beside the basic what you get, which is a Zoom H5 and a pair of 2035 Audio-Technica mics. We added a Shure SM57 in the snare and another Shure SM57 on the kick, which are very low cost mics, around $100 each. Very worthwhile investments to have in your studio for a myriad of tasks. Today, my name is Paul Harlyn. I didn't introduce myself. And I am joined today by Derrick Harvin from Project and Portfolio 7. And of course, on drums back here, we have Jon Curtis from Advanced Mixing Techniques. So if you haven't seen these two wonderful people yet, you will in coming months. I am in Project and Portfolio 3, which is month 16. So I look forward to seeing you, or if I have seen you, welcome back. So in future town halls, we're going to be covering more elaborate mic choices, like I said. Other references include a Full Sail YouTube site. If you haven't been to the Full Sail YouTube site, that's got a fascinating bunch of YouTube videos on drum miking, guitar amp miking. I did one on recording, doing, what is it called? Project Studio, sound isolation in the Project Studio. That was fascinating. So also in my Project and Portfolio 3 class, I used the Alan Parsons Art of Sound Recording series. So I go through a whole lot of drum miking in Portfolio 3, and I think we covered other places too. So let's get jumping right into what we need to talk about, which is the different mic techniques. I need to open up my, my little keynote here and see what I'm talking about. So the first thing is we're going to be going to this Zoom H5. We're going to assume that you just show up at a location recording, that you're recording the drums at a drummer's house, a drummer's place, and you just bring your Zoom and your MacBook Pro. We're not going to be talking about the Focus interface for the first two choices. We're going to go through 5 different mic choices, of iterations of mic choices. That's why you see so many mics here, but we're only going to be using a few at a time. So the first thing is we're going to talk about is we have 2 mics here plugged into the front of the Zoom interface. So the first choice that you're going to hear is going to be 2 mics. It's going to be the one mic, the overhead drum mic, which is pointing straight down at the snare drum, and that's going to pick up the whole close sound of the kit. And then the second mic we're going to be listening to would be the mic right in front of the drums right here that you see pointed a healthy distance between the kick. It's going to pick up a nice room boom on the kick drum, and it's going to pick up the cymbals equally. So between this balance here and this balance here, you would pan it out about 2 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and that could sound really nice and big with 2 microphones, Zoom interface, not buying anything else. And with that being said, let's take a listen to that. Jon, give us a beat. So hopefully that came across well. Just a word of, if you're streaming this live right now, YouTube live streams in a mono way at this moment from our source. But if you listen to this on the archive, you will be hearing it in the true stereo as Derrick has it panned out in the Pro Tools session. We are recording this now inside. We're sending it through Pro Tools on the way out to the mixer to get to YouTube Live. So the second setup, I'm going to call that 1A. And by the way, I made a keynote of this. Let's switch over to the keynote for a second, Derrick. And if you could see the keynote on the screen, you'll see that 1A showed exactly what I just talked about. So now we're going to jump over to 1B, okay? And we're going to see that, as you can read on the screen, 2 mics with the Zoom interface, adding the internal H5 mics as a 4 mic setup, all coming out stereo output. Now, you could take this, there's 2 more options. Right now, we're just not using this as the interface the way I'm recommending that you use it, but I'm actually coming out stereo out of the line out. So all 4 of these mics are coming into it, they're being mixed right now with the live choices. That's not the best way to do it, but because I did not want to switch interfaces in the middle of this presentation, I left the Focusrite be the interface. But right now we were hearing it stereo out of the line out. Now, if you were doing this and hearing 4 mics, you would take the out of the USB out and plug that directly into your Mac, and you would have the 4 discrete channels coming into 4 channels into Pro Tools, and you'd be good to go. So now we have 4 mics, as we say. We've got the 2 Zoom mics in an XY pattern, and we've got the same 2 mics that just were in 1A, which is the overhead and the front of drums. So let's take a listen to that. Jon, thank you. Yay! Bam! I like that. Nice and simple beat. Okay, so now we're going to switch something around. I'm going to pull the 2 cables, these 2 Audio-Technica mics. This and this mic. Let's keep that straight. I'm going to pull them out of the Zoom, and now we're going to switch over to the Focusrite interface and talk about that. And then while I'm doing that, I'll talk about a particular setup that is going to be interesting to hear about. There's an engineer by the name of Glenn Johns, and he was the engineer for all of Led Zeppelin records, and he recorded this, he made up this technique that is known universally around the world as the Glenn Johns 3 mic technique. So let's plug these in and I'll continue talking about that. This goes into 5. And so, as I said, Glenn Johns is known as the master of the John Bonham big drum sound, and he got a lot of that with 3 microphones, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Now, of course, in some of the big ones, when they recorded at Headley Grange, they would actually put microphones down stairways and record mics from 30, 40, 50 feet away and get this big room, and they would compress them. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about 3 mics. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Now, the Glenn Johns mic technique, I'm going to bring out a little tape measure. Now, you don't have to use a tape measure. You can use, I'm going to get the exact distance from this overhead mic to the snare to this side mic. So it's a very interesting technique. Ignore these microphones in front. We're only going to start by talking about 2 mics. Okay? So I'm going to measure 40 inches between the center of the snare and the center of the capsule here. And that's exactly 40 inches, right? And we have that pointing straight down at the center, the snare drum. And that's going to pick up this overall hi-hat, crash cymbal, tom 1, and snare equally. Now over here, we have, let's do that again, we have from the center of the snare to the center of this capsule, we also have exactly 40 inches. So why do I care that these 2 mics are 40 inches the same? Well, the whole goal is the snare is the main element in a drum set. The snare is what you really want to get that crack from, and you want to get, that's where your meter is going to be driving the most, and that's the thing you care most about, the tone of the snare is really the sound of the whole drum kit. So every time Jon hits that snare, I want that snare waveform to reach this microphone and this microphone at the same. If they're at the same distance, then the two waveforms are going to reach there at the same time. That's really important because then we've got, if we put them up together, which is of course what we're going to do, if we put them in mono and pan them straight to the center, we're going to be getting equal distance. We're going to get equal power from each of those. Now, if they were moved farther apart, we would get a phase difference. If in my class I talk about phasing and talk about some of the waveforms that are off by a few milliseconds, and that'll adjust your, it'll really make a weird phasing sound, and just it'll sound out of place, and it won't make the drum set sound as natural. So adding to that, the third mic, of course, right now we'd be missing a kick drum mic. So I added a kick drum. Now, normally a Shure SM57 would not be the ideal kick mic, but it can be the ideal kick drum mic if you have the right drummer, if you have the right drums, and you have the right interface, and everything sounds good. The example I like to use is the Red Hot Chili Peppers, recorded at Rick Rubin's place, Shangri-La Recording, back in whenever that was, 90-something. They recorded the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He put his drum kit in the spare bedroom, and they had all the other recording devices other places. The guitar amp was in another bedroom, and they used a 57 for that whole Under the Bridge song and all the other famous songs off that album, Californication. Sorry, the name of the album was Californication. So a 57 can be utilized as a kick drum because the other good thing about a 57 is very directional, it's very tight, and you're not going to get a lot of bleed from other sources. So it's a great transient that you record that you can use to trigger kick drums from samples. So that's why I'm using it today, to show you that a $100 mic here and another mic directly on the snare can be a great example of I'm taking the Glenn John techniques of the two overheads and a kick drum, but I'm cheating a little bit and I'm adding a little extra crack. Let's take over here, zoom into this snare mic over here, and I've got the snare pointing right at the center of the snare drum, and it's just off half an inch off this rim. Now, if I moved it up about 3 inches off the rim, which some people show, I'm losing some of that crack and I'm going to lose some of that presence. So I really like to have that mic right just off the rim. Just make sure you're nice and tight here so the mic doesn't slip down and touch the snare, and we'll be rocking solid there. So now we're going to hear the Glenn John techniques with an added snare as an extra bonus. Recorded to 4 tracks in Pro Tools. Let's hear it, and hit it, Jon. All right. Now, anybody notice how consistent Jon's tempo is? He's either like Ringo Starr consistency, or he's cheating. And if we look over here, we're going to see a little tempo thing on his iPhone. We're going to see a little tempo thing going on at 105, and he's got it going into his ear. So when you're hearing some consistent tempo like that, that's either a masterful drummer or it's Jon cheating us with a click crack, which is not cheating at all. That's a joke. Okay, so let's switch to 2B. That was 2A. Let's switch over to 2B. So I'm going to ignore the 2 mics, pretend these don't even exist up here. I'm going to look at these 2 mics. So now I'm going to switch this from a mic pointing at the kick drum, because I'm going to keep the 57 in this example on the kick drum. So I'm going to move this up now, and I'm going to make a A-B pattern between these 2 mics. So what I'm looking for here is I'm trying to get this to cover the whole, this side of the drums, covering up here, this side of the drums, and this mic is going to cover, obviously, this side of the drum. So ignore the overheads. I'm going to take a 4 mic technique that is going to use these 2 in an A-B pattern, and then I'm going to keep the same kick I just had and the same snare. So we're back, instead of using these 2 overheads and getting a more directional sound, we're going to hear the direct sound from the 2 mics here, and these 2 mics are now going to be called upon to pick up the cymbals and the hi-hat even, and the tom-toms. So we're asking a lot of these, so we're going to put a lot of compression on these to pick up that.
Let's double check those front two mics.
Cool. Let's do a little scratch on this.
So I'm not getting it.
This is the secret on how to test a mic rather than me screaming into it or tapping it. You don't want to tap it. You want to do a little scratching.
Show it where here.
Okay. Technical difficulties are normal when you're dealing with this amount of microphones and this amount of cables.
Not getting signal.
So neither one. No, make sure fan and power went on 5 through 8 also. Make sure both fan and powers are on.
Double check that.
Okay. As technical difficulties go on here, let's see what else could possibly be wrong. We got a lot of cables here. It's a pretty simple setup.
All right.
We got it?
On.
All right. We are in business. So, as I said, this is now we're asking a lot of these mics. I'll repeat it again. I would probably normally compress these and pick up more room sound, but also be able to pick up these toms. I'm asking these guys to pick up the toms and the whole kit. Now, the secret to doing this, besides having the kick and the snare be direct, is we have to trust that the drummer is going to be able to balance himself. When you put an individual mic on every single drum, now in the mix stage, you can say, I want a lot more kick, a lot more snare, a lot more, and you can gate the toms, and you can do a lot more fancy stuff with every single mic. Now, we're not doing that. Now we're relying on these two guys. So we have to trust that the drummer is going to be able to balance out his tom hits with his crash cymbal, with his hi-hat. And so it takes a great drummer to do that. So the three things I like to say to make this room mic only technique happen is you have to have a good drummer, a great drummer. You have to have great drums, which we have a fantastic set from our studios here, and we have to have a good sounding room, which we happen to have here, a nice tight sounding room. So we have all those things in place. So let's take a listen to 2B, which is 4 mics again. I've only got one more. I got to kill time. Okay. Well, hopefully that sounded good coming through the YouTube channels. So we have one more mic scenario to talk about. And it's a very good one. Now we're going to add together, we're going to take what we just heard, and we're going to add the zoom with the analog out. So now we're going to add these two mics, and we're going to throw it together with the zoom mic. So now we have 2 pair of room mics. Now that zoom, I could even move it further back. In fact, maybe I will move it a few inches further back just to differentiate the AB pattern from the XY pattern here. Let's move this back a little bit. How far can I go back with my cable will allow right there. Now, something I also want to mention is if you ever record with the zoom as a digital out, it will have a little latency by the time it gets to your Pro Tools rig. So the key is to understand that latency and to know it's there, and to either allow it and go with it and say that really helps the bigness of this drum set, or compensate for it by moving your waveform. So we've done some tests here at Full Sail, and we've learned that if you take the digital out of the zoom and you combine it with a close mic, there will be a 3 millisecond delay. And you can take that for checking yourself. If you record with the zoom and also record with close mics, and you look at the waveforms, you'll see a 3 millisecond offset. So you would literally just take those zoom mics and put them back in time with the other mics as they're recorded. So this right now, we're at a 5 mic setup, right? We've got the kick, we've got the snare, we've got the 2 in the front, and we've got the 2 in the zoom. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm sorry, 6 mic setup. I can count, yeah. So yeah, stereo pair there, stereo pair here, and 2 direct sounds, and I think we're good to go. John, take it away. Okay.
Talk about label and I/O. So.
Okay. So that was our 6 mic setup. So before we go any further, I want to talk about headphones, okay? So normally you would come out of your Focusrite, obviously you need to feed yourself headphones, right? Because you can't have speakers in the room if the drummer's playing. And then you would take the separate headphone out and feed it to the drummer. I really recommend, let's take a zoom in on Derrick's headphones he's wearing. He's wearing the Sennheiser headphones, which you guys all got with your launch box. I would recommend these highly for giving the drummer. And also if you need to check your drums, because they do a really good job at isolating sound. The headphones I like to use for mixing are, the AKG, are just really high end, but they're open. And they're getting a little bleed. So that'd be really hard to use those kind of headphones for any kind of drum miking scenarios. So that's why I purposely have the Sennheisers here, keep them around because they seal really well against your head. And so that's a great choice. And you want to feed the drummer. The drummer might have his own headphones that he likes to use, and he probably used to having sealed headphones. If he has in-ear monitors that are already set to his ears, those are excellent sources also. So you could literally get an extension cord off his in-ear monitor and run that into the output number 2 of your headphone mix. Now let's talk about how we're going to have the drummer play along with the tracks, because we're not just having him play solo against a click. He's usually playing along with tracks. So it's up to you to give the drummer the mix of your music. So let's take a scenario that you've recorded your music in Logic, right? And then you knew you're going to send it out individually tracks into Pro Tools. But let's say you want a really lean and mean Pro Tools session, so you could just take your Logic session and literally do a bounce of everything, but no click and no digital drums or no sample drums, just a bounce of all your music and you know you can always derive the click inside Pro Tools, so you have your ultimate level on that. So you would just take a bounce out of out of Logic, 24-bit, whatever sample rate you're using, and then open up a brand new session that you would call your drum session, right? That way you have it nice and clean. You don't have to deal with all your tracks on all your other individual things. Now you have a nice, beautiful stereo track, and then you're going to feed that stereo track to the drummer, and then you're going to have a click there, so the drummer's going to be able to, you're going to have the click derived from Pro Tools, so you have your own separate level control on the click, and you can feed that. So we're not even talking about getting into a separate drummer's mix versus what mix you're hearing in your headphones. We're going to send the same mix to the drummer as you hear, keep it really simple, and the idea is get that click track nice and loud so that drummer can hear the click track on top of his own drums and on top of his on top of what the music is playing. Now, some drummers want their drums really loud in their headphones, right? And some drummers want just to be able to hear the music really loud and the clicks really loud. So you would definitely have a strong communication open up with the drummer and ask them what they prefer to hear to get the best performance out of that, because you never know, like I say, some drummers can't feel, if they can't hear themselves enough, they're going to be hitting the kick drum way too hard because they're going to want to feel it. So you want to give it to. Now we have a magic little stool back here that John's sitting on. It's got what's that thing called? A thumper? Yeah. A thumper, right? So you literally can take the output of your kick drum or anything else, and it's meant for live, but you could use it in the studio too. You can literally feed an input into this thumper, so every time the drummer hits his kick drum, you don't have to drive his ears or in-ear monitors crazy. It's literally a rump thumper, I think is the technical word there. It's going to thump, and he's going to feel it, and that means he's going to play more naturally, and he's not going to have to slam on that kick drum in order to hear it, in order to feel it, in order to feel it, because drums are all about feeling, right? So we're going to jump back into 2A, is that right, Derrick?
That's 2A. Let's go to 2A.
So we're going to jump back into 2A because we had a little phantom power issue. You got to be careful on these Focusrite interfaces. If sometimes when you leave them alone for a little bit, the phantom power can jump off, especially if you restart Pro Tools or restart the Focusrite. You always got to keep an eye on that. You phantom power 1 through 4, phantom power 5 through 8. You got to make sure they're all rocking there. So we're going to go back to 2A, which if I look at my notes, that says 57 on the kick, 57 on the snare, and we're going to go back to the Glenn Johns, right? Exactly. We're going to back to our favorite setup. You'll probably notice that this one sounds, we get rid of the room sound, we get rid of the zoom. Now we're just going to back to our 4 microphones. So something else I want to mention about this is our I/O setup. So we've been jumping back and forth. If we can take a look at the Pro Tools screen there, Derrick, and put the Pro Tools screen on the feed, you'll see that we've got a nice simple looking setup, right? And I think if you even click on the click track, you'll see up top there, we even have a click track option if we wanted to have that coming out. But what I wanted to talk about here is the I/O setup. Now I have how many different mics do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 mics going on here, plugged amazingly enough into 8 channels of my audio interface. Now I'm only using 2, 4, 6, or that's it. I was only using 2 or 4 or 6 mics. The key is, in order to do this routing, I wanted to be clear on my I/O setup. Derrick, can you talk about the I/O setup for a minute?
Yes, so the I/O setup is really important as you guys are recording and in your own studios. Let's pull up the I/O setup and look at the input tab here. And as you can see, we have inputs 1 through 6, these are stereo, and then we have the H5 here. But if I was to open this to see each of these paths here, we can see that we're individually feeding these to individual channels, such as 7 and 8 here, as we see on the screen. And this is really important as we're doing this presentation here, and we're going back and forth and getting some quick takes, drum takes from Jon. As you see, as I was engaging the tracks or recording them, it's really important that you have the right I/O setup so you know exactly what's feeding that track. For example, let's say on here we see the Snare 57, so we're using the Shure 57 mic here. But let's say on the tom track here, we accidentally had this set up for a different input. Now we're picking up a signal. We see signal feeding into Pro Tools and it's actually being recorded, but it's actually the wrong microphone. So the I/O setup is really important. Another thing I would like to mention, you see over here my clip list here, I have many of the files that we've recorded, but one thing that we could really take advantage of as you're recording and getting multiple drum takes to just see which one is going to work best for your recording needs is to take advantage of your playlist. I can quickly, with these tracks highlighted here, I can hold down a combination of shortcuts here, which is Shift and Option, and I can go ahead and click on New. And as I click on New, we see that these toggle to an extension of 0.01. Now I have new playlists for each of these takes. So let's say on the first take, we had the drummer play and we needed to give a little more velocity, a little more energy in the take. We move the microphones around a little bit more and we want to see how they respond in the room that we're recording. We always have that first take here by just toggling back to our original playlist that we have here. So it's really important. So not only are we trying to get good drum signals here, but the organization of what's happening in the DAW is just as important for our post work once we get into mixing and editing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Derrick. That's great. So a question came in from the YouTube Live audience, and it was about the interface. So as I mentioned before, we started out, the first 2 examples used the Zoom H5 as the interface, which is not the preferable one, especially for drums, but it did an okay job. In a pinch, if you need to do that and you don't feel like carrying your interface. So today, we are using the Focusrite. What's the exact name on this one?
This is the Focusrite 18
IO20, right?
Yes.
Which is called not a Sapphire, but it's called a
Scarlet.
Yeah. And so we have all 8 mics plugged into there. So the question came in, what interface is best? I can only talk about, there's many choices of interfaces. They're coming out it seems like every month there's a new interface. So is it, PreSonus came out with a new mixing board with an interface in it. Who else?
Just dropped some new low budget ones the other day. So,
Yeah.
Almost every week.
Mark of the Unicorn, Motu, just came out with brand new series. So there's so many great choices. But if you want to get especially if you're a hard-hitting drummer and you want to pick up all the details of a jazz drummer, Universal Audio makes some of the best interfaces. Of course, they're a little pricey. Derrick and I both use Universal Audio interfaces in our studio.
Jon as well.
as Jon does, yeah. And so I can't say enough great things. And the beautiful thing about Universal Audio interfaces is you get a certain amount of plugins, that Universal Audio plugins that work, and they're called unison plugins, which means that you can actually use them on the input. and there's no inherent delay. So you can call up a Neve preamp. You can use this, I have the X6, which gives you 6 cores of processing power inside it, and it's got great sounding interface even without even using the Unison plugins, which comes in, with their own software. But I really love calling up a Neve preamp or an API preamp or some of the other ones. What's your favorite preamps there that you have, Derrick?
I use a lot of the same, the 1073 Neve,
Yeah.
the SSL.
Yeah.
G
And
series.
also using some of their compressors that are built in is they have great sounding, their Universal Audio, UA is Universal Audio, and they've been making hardware since Bill Putnam started in the mid 50s. So as they say, their ad, I sound like I'm doing an ad for them right now. Their ad is analog soul, digital minds, something like that. Anyways, they have an analog soul, and they do because they've been doing it for a long time. Now, Bill Putnam Jr., since the senior passed away, his 2 sons have taken over and do an incredible job. So you're going to see a lot of pros if they don't have an Avid interface or they don't have most pros these days are using some form of universal audio interfaces. Now they're a little pricey. Now they just came out with a brand new, smaller, desktop unit. I use the X6, which is a rack mount, but the desktop units are amazing too. And you get a lot of free plugins with them. So check them out. Now I'm going to stop my ad right now. No more ads. but
The Focusrites are amazing.
yeah. For the price.
And they're super affordable, and they're clean.
Yeah. So John's not on a mic, but I'm going to echo what he just said. Is the Focusrite, for the low price that they are, they're super clean, and it's got a Focusrite name, a Focusrite preamp, and they're really high quality. And as you can hear in these recordings, and you've been doing recordings in them too, so don't sell yourself short on your Focusrite interface. They're wonderful interfaces as far as
maximize the gear that you have.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't use excuses. Derrick. That's a great point.
Maximize the gear that you have.
People are not going around singing the quality of your recording. They're going around singing the hook and the lyric, right? What touches them, or if it's an instrumental, the lead instrument is touching them in some way. So don't get so hung up on the technical that you forget about the big picture, which is you're trying to communicate an idea. You're trying to communicate something, with this piece of music, whether it's a piece of art or a sculpture or dance or whatever it is, you're trying to communicate a feeling and an idea. So with music, we're trying to communicate some really, some emotion that's going on. And so just be aware that, we're all gearheads. We all love, newest and fattest gear, or sometimes the oldest gear, but it comes down to the song, and it comes down to the players and how the players are reacting to each other. So one thing I want to mention is, so far we're talking about having your track done and then adding the drummer with it playing on top of your track that already exists. And you can do that in person. You could do that, send your tracks out to a professional drummer and hire them to do it. But the other thing is, sometimes the interaction between the bass player and the drummer, or even having a guitar player or a keyboard player in line doing it at the same time, is an important part of making music, because music is all about feeling, and it's called play music for a reason. What do? We play music. So if you get multiple people together and they are actually playing music, that feeling that they're playing together is going to come across on the recording. And as Derrick, you play with some of the best musicians around, and what can you say about that?
Exactly, it's the chemistry in the studio, and and I think a good takeaway from all of this is maximizing the gear that you have. We really encourage you to explore with the microphone. Placement. This room that you probably can't see it as well in the video, but the room that we're in is fairly live. This would be a good room for just doing some performances, doing video work. But when we want a really true isolated kind of tight sound, especially recording drums, so we have the good signals that we can control in the mix. This is going to take a lot of experimenting on your end, so use your ears. We have many inputs and outputs. This piece of gear that you have in your launch box is very flexible. There are a number of inexpensive drum miking kits that you can add to your existing microphones. So you have the H5 and you have the 2035s. So look into the SM57s. They're very staple mics, very, very versatile, as Paul mentioned earlier. So the great thing about the launch box is something that you can build upon. you know, I would like to leave you with that you can certainly add to it to enhance your studio experience for your clients and both yourself. So.
And if you buy another interface that has an ADAT light pipe output, you can use that. And,
Yes, to
or
expand.
other preamps that have ADAT light pipe, you can put the ADAT light pipe directly into your Focusrite and make that the command center,
Yes.
and then bring other. I personally do that. I have Yamaha digital mixers that I come out light pipe into my universal audio interface, so that allows me a lot more inputs and a lot of keyboards and things to be plugged in and at the same time live, and it gives me the best of both worlds. You know, a full console feeding into an interface, so you have a lot of the best of the both worlds. So, yeah, it's a lot of great tools. So let's take a listen to the last example, and then we're going to do a wrap up. And this last example there again is with the Glenn Johns overhead and the kick and the snare. It's one of my favorite examples because it's simple, but it picks up a nice round picture of the drums with a direct kick and a direct snare. So let's take a listen to that. 2A. I think so.
Okay, or we were on 3.
Oh yeah, we don't want that.
Okay, let me clear some of these takes that I have in here,
Oh boy.
if I haven't already confused you enough. Let's
So
go back
as you'll
to-
see, the Pro Tools man is the man with all the pressure, right?
Oh, yeah.
The drummer's doing his gig, he's playing music, but it's up to the Pro Tools op to pull this off and to make everything work smoothly. And you know, I mean, there's always going to be little glitches like that, but that's just part of the course. Take it as it goes and move on.
Here's 2A.
Got it?
Yes.
Cool.
All right, so that was back to Glenn Johns with an added snare drum. So before we wrap up, I want to point out, I already pointed out the closeness of the snare mic, how I like that right 1/2 an inch right off the shell. I want to talk about this kick drum. Can we zoom into here? Let me get this out of the way. So this kick drum mic, like I said, is a 57, so you need one of these small mics. You can't do it with a large boom mic, or you can't get a large boom mic. You would, obviously a boom mic, you could put the mic right there, but if we take a 57 and put it right there in front, it's not going to quite pick up the exact click that we're looking for. I would typically use this for the attack, and I would put it in here as far as I can. You notice we got a whole bunch of deadening material in here, all kinds of, you know, what do we call these, shirts, rags, all kinds of things. So I wanted to stick this thing in as far as I can get it and point it right up to the beater. So this is going to give me that heavy attack click that I can there again use as a sample, you know, to derive a sample from. I can use it as a sound replacer item. Now, if I had a second mic, I could put a, you know, we'll talk about this in the next one, with putting a second mic and add together the kick inside and the kick out. And we could even build a tunnel here to isolate this mic out here from all the other cymbals. So there's various other techniques you can use, but I find it very powerful to get this right inside there, right up there, and get a really nice attack sound, because then later on you can dial in as much boom. You can even trigger a sine wave to make an 808 kick, right? You can trigger, just tune a sine wave down to 60 or 70 hertz, tune it to the key of the song you're in, and you've got a nice big old boom. The mic there, yeah. Big old boom, and that'd be a nice addition. Or you can load up any sample you want and use a triggering. Logic makes it real easy to do triggering from samples. So there's a lot to learn about microphone on drums. I mean, I've been doing it for almost 40 years, and I'm still learning things. It's still interesting to see what's going on. You know, and how many different choices you have, and how many different, you know, interface, microphones, distance, you know, drums. You know, next time we'll also talk about deadening the drums. We have a little secret here. It's called, what's it called, John? It's called moon gel. He's got it on the tom here, a little piece of rubber, thing that you put them on the tom. Sometimes you put it on the snare, and it deadens out some of the rings. So we talk about that. So, with that said, we hope you enjoyed this Guerrilla drum miking techniques. That means doing with what you have, right? Remember that the Audio Production Town Hall is a monthly event, ordinarily happening on the third Monday of each class month. Keep an eye out on Full Sail 1 for information on next month's Town Hall. Thank you for joining us, and unless there's no more questions, we're going to sign off. Thanks, Derrick. Thanks, John, and me, Paul Harlyn. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in my class.